Katherine of Aragon, hailed by William Shakespeare as the Queen of Earthly Queens, was the longest-serving wife of Henry VIII. Born to the illustrious monarchs Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon, Catherine's lineage was only one facet of her impressive background. This Spanish princess boasted a rich and varied education, excelling in languages, humanities, and arithmetic, along with mastering domestic skills. A voracious reader with a love for literature from a young age, Catherine was groomed for queenship, but also developed a strong independent mind, a characteristic that would later define her life. Catherine first married Henry's elder brother Arthur in 1501. Unfortunately, Arthur passed away a year into their marriage, leaving Catherine a widow at just 17. To maintain the advantageous Spanish alliance, it was decided that Henry VIII would marry Catherine once he reached maturity, and her dowry was settled, a process that took another 7 years. During this period, Catherine lived in London under restrictive conditions, practically a prisoner. This situation led Henry VII, Henry VIII's father, to believe she would be compliant and easily controlled. However, Catherine defied these expectations, demonstrating her intelligence and resilience by serving as the Spanish ambassador to England in 1507, the first woman in European history to hold such a position. Henry VIII and Catherine wed in 1509, and for much of their 24-year marriage, they enjoyed a happy union. Yet, as the years passed without a surviving male heir, despite having a daughter, Mary, who would later become England's first queen regnant, Henry grew desperate to secure his legacy. Convinced that his marriage to his brother's widow was cursed, he believed it was the reason for his lack of a male heir. This conviction led to a dramatic upheaval in England's religious and political landscape. Henry, despite having a papal dispensation for his marriage, sought an annulment that the Pope refused to grant. Between 1525 and 1533, Henry severed ties with the papacy, establishing himself as the head of the Church of England, thus consolidating his authority and rejecting any external religious control. In 1533, Thomas Cranmer, the newly appointed Archbishop of Canterbury and a staunch supporter of Henry, declared Henry's marriage to Catherine null and void. Consequently, their daughter Mary was declared illegitimate and stripped of her status as princess. That same year, Henry married Anne Boleyn, Catherine's former lady-in-waiting, with whom he had fallen deeply in love. Catherine, banished from court and living in isolation, remained unwavering in her dignity, steadfastly defending her title as queen until her death in 1536. Henry VIII's break from Rome thrust England into the throes of the Protestant Reformation. While his initial motivation was to secure a divorce from his first wife, Katherine of Aragon, others viewed the Reformation as a means to address the Catholic Church's abuses and liberate the English people. Among these reformers was Anne Boleyn. Renowned Tudor historian Eric Ives described the women in Anne Boleyn's circle as aristocratic women seeking spiritual fulfillment. This description fits Anne's formative years at the French court, where she served as maid of honor to Claude of France. During this time, Anne encountered influential women like Marguerite de Navarre, who was outspoken on religious and political issues and respected as a poet and playwright. These experiences likely shaped Anne's reformist ideals and demonstrated how powerful women could patronize the arts and champion progressive ideas. By the time Anne arrived at the English court in 1522, she was an extraordinary and captivating presence. Unlike most court ladies, she exuded a cosmopolitan charm. Fluent in French, adept at dancing and singing, fashionably dressed in the latest French styles, and skilled in playing several musical instruments, Anne also possessed a sharp and witty mind. Young noblemen eagerly sought her attention, but it wasn't until 1525 that her adeptness at courtly love captured the interest of Henry VIII. Anne resisted Henry's advances until their future was more certain, but they quickly developed a profound affection for each other, as evidenced by their passionate 7-year correspondence. During their courtship, Anne played a crucial role in diplomatic efforts, particularly in strengthening England's alliance with France. Henry and Anne married on May 28, 1533, and later that year Anne gave birth to a daughter, the future Elizabeth I. However, like Catherine before her, Anne experienced several miscarriages and failed to produce a male heir. Her brief tenure as queen ended tragically in 1536 when she was executed on charges of adultery, treason, and incest, leading to her daughter Elizabeth being declared illegitimate. Historians largely agree that these charges were fabricated to remove Anne. The reasons for her downfall are still debated. Some believe Henry sought a new wife to provide a male heir, while others argue that Anne's clashes with powerful men over reform policies led to her demise. Both factors likely played a role, but it is clear that Henry remained determined to secure his succession and would not wait long before attempting again. Looking at Katherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, it appears that Henry VIII had a penchant for educated and cultured wives. However, Anne's political zeal and Catherine's steadfastness may have been overwhelming for him, leading him to his next wife, Jane Seymour, who was their polar opposite. Demure, chaste and humble, Jane epitomized wifely obedience and modesty. Unlike Anne and Catherine, Jane was not highly educated, but she excelled in household management and needlework. Little is known about her life before she entered the court, but she was praised by her contemporaries for her gentle and kind nature. Notably, Imperial Ambassador Eustace Chapuys lauded her for her successful efforts in reconciling Mary, Henry's daughter with Catherine, to her father. In October 1537, just over a year after her coronation, Jane gave birth to the long-awaited male heir, the future King Edward VI. Despite fulfilling her wifely duties perfectly, Jane tragically died from postnatal complications shortly after. Henry was profoundly grieved by her death, and all indications suggest that he would have remained devoted to her had she lived. His genuine affection for Jane is poignantly illustrated by the fact that she was the only one of his wives to receive an official Queen's funeral and to be buried beside him in St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. In 16th century Europe, strategic marriages were a common means to forge political and religious alliances. Among Henry VIII's marriages, only his unions with Catherine of Aragon and Anne of Cleves can truly be considered strategic. Following the death of Jane Seymour, Henry took over 2 years before contemplating marriage again. During this period, Lord Chancellor Thomas Cromwell, acting as a marriage broker, suggested a union with one of the Cleves sisters, Anne or Amelia. Cromwell, a committed Protestant reformer, recognised that a marriage to either sister would garner the support of the Schmalkaldic League, a military alliance of Lutheran princes, which would bolster Henry's position against the powerful Catholic forces in Europe. To facilitate the decision, court painter Hans Holbein was dispatched to Germany to create portraits of the sisters. Based on these portraits and favourable reports, Henry chose Anne, and wedding arrangements were made. However, when Henry met Anne in person on January 1st, 1540, his initial enthusiasm quickly waned. In a chivalric gesture, Henry disguised himself as a servant and rushed to Rochester to surprise Anne. According to the traditions of courtly love, Anne was expected to see through the disguise and recognise Henry as her true love. Instead, Anne, unfamiliar with English customs, failed to recognise him, bruising Henry's ego. Despite Henry's misgivings, the marriage proceeded on January 6, 1540. Yet, within months, it was clear that the union was doomed. By July 6, 1540, Anne was informed that Henry was reconsidering their marriage. The 6-month marriage was far from happy. Little is known about Anne's life before her proposal as Henry's wife. At court, she was seen as kind and gentle, enjoying card games, but she lacked the culture and education to connect with Henry. Unfamiliar with English customs, Anne never had the chance to acclimate to her new environment. On July 9th, their marriage was annulled on the grounds of non-consummation. Cromwell, who had championed the marriage, fell from favour and was executed. Contrary to Henry's past experiences, Anne accepted the annulment with grace. She received a generous settlement and, due to her compliance and pleasant nature, was recognised as an honorary member of the royal family, earning the title of beloved sister. She lived peacefully in England for the remainder of her life and died of natural causes 10 years after Henry. Henry VIII's lack of attraction to his wife Anne of Cleves soon led him to a more enticing prospect, the lively teenager Katherine Howard. Unlike his previous wives, Catherine's upbringing was less conventional. Although she came from an aristocratic background, being the first cousin of Anne Boleyn and second cousin of Jane Seymour, her family circumstances were modest. Her father, Lord Edmund Howard, was the third son in a family of 21, and under the custom of primogeniture, he inherited nothing. With around 10 children to support, he was eventually reduced to begging. Following her mother's death around 1528, Catherine was sent to live with the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. Due to the Duchess's duties at court and the many households she managed, Catherine and other poor aristocrats in her care often had significant freedom. It was common for men to visit the girls' rooms, and Catherine attracted the attention of two older men, her music teacher, Henry Manox, and the Dowager's secretary, Francis Derham. When Henry VIII expressed his dissatisfaction with his marriage to Anne of Cleves, Catherine's uncle, Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk, saw an opportunity. He introduced the young and charming Catherine into the Queen's service, and Henry soon noticed her vibrant and playful demeanour. They married on July 28, 1540, just weeks after Henry's divorce from Anne of Cleves. As Queen, Catherine, though too young to engage in state matters, brought a carefree and joyous presence to the court, often seen dressed in lavish, bejewelled French fashion. However, their marriage lasted just over a year. Catherine's free-spirited nature led to accusations of an affair with Thomas Culpeper, a favourite of Henry, and rumours of a prior engagement with Derham. Consequently, she was stripped of her title as Queen in November 1541 and executed 3 months later. Katherine Howard proved to be a different kind of pawn. While her marriage did not yield political advantages, her infectious joy pleased Henry, fulfilling his need for a lively companion. The allure of becoming queen and escaping poverty was likely irresistible for Catherine, despite the eventual tragic outcome. Catherine Parr was Henry VIII's 6th and final wife, staying by his side until his death on January 28, 1547. Twice widowed by the age of 31, Catherine brought a level of emotional maturity to her marriage with Henry. She approached her roles as queen, wife, and stepmother with a deep sense of duty, continuing Jane Seymour's efforts to foster peace within the court. While Jane had initiated the restoration of Lady Mary, it was Catherine who succeeded in reinstating both Mary and Anne Boleyn's daughter, Lady Elizabeth, to the line of succession. Catherine's influence would later be evident in the reign of Elizabeth I. When Henry embarked on his final campaign to France in 1544, he appointed Catherine as regent. She managed the finances and provisions for the campaign, signed royal proclamations, and monitored the ongoing war in Scotland, which lasted from November 24, 1542 to March 1551. Through Catherine, Elizabeth saw firsthand how a woman could effectively rule in her own right. Originally a Catholic, Catherine became a passionate reformer and surrounded herself with like-minded individuals, including Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Lord Hertford, Jane Seymour's elder brother. This drew the attention of court officials like Stephen Gardiner, the Bishop of Winchester, who were wary of Protestant influences. Despite attempts to arrest her, Catherine managed to persuade Henry that her religious discussions were not radical. However, after Henry's death, she published her second book, Lamentations of a Sinner, which clearly conveyed her Protestant beliefs. Whether Henry was swayed by Catherine's arguments or his failing health made him seek stability, Catherine remained a devoted stepmother to his 3 children and took custody of the young Elizabeth after Henry's death. Her lasting impact on the Tudor court and Elizabeth's future reign is undeniable. The 6 wives of Henry VIII are often remembered only by how their marriages or lives ended, a view that overshadows their true impact. Beyond being Henry's wives, they played significant roles in the political and religious arenas, fought for personal rights, championed public works, and contributed to the intellectual landscape.